Amongst the ruins of Germany in 1945 stood millions of teenagers who were called the Hitler Youth. What happened to them was devastating after their hero died. Subscribe now because this is about to be a wild ride. The transition. When Adolf Hitler got power back in January 1933, the Hitler Youth was barely a footnote. It was a small, scattered group of young men in a scattered organization that was founded back in 1936 with fewer than 100,000 members. Within a decade, it could control nearly every single young person in Germany and manipulate them into thinking that Hitler's ideology was the best ideology. Under the Nazi youth leader Baldur, who was appointed back in 1931, the movement exploded. The Nazis understood something crazy. If you want to build a 1,000-year Nazi Germany, you start with the children. Baldur's job was molding them into Hitler's image, and he was quite effective with his approach. Then came January 1936, when he brought the law on Hitler Youth, making membership a civic duty for all the Aryan boys and girls aged between 10 and 18. 3 years later, the Youth Service Decree of March 1939 made it legally compulsory. Every child was now the state's property, and was trained physically, politically, ideologically, and mentally to serve the right. The organization was divided by age and gender with amazing efficiency. Boys aged between 10 and 14 joined the Jungvolk and learned basic rules, camping, and nature skills that glorified war. When they became 14, they graduated to a particular Jungmannschaft where training shifted to endurance, marksmanship, and absolute obedience to authority. This was the turning point in their life. On the other hand, girls entered the League of German Girls, which was focused on homemaking, nursing, and physical fitness, designed to produce healthy mothers for future soldiers. Together, these branches transformed small kids into militarized state servants, almost like they were some kind of test subjects to them. There were weekly meetings, endless marches, and weekend camps that changed the line between childhood and political youth. After the war began on September 1, 1929, the Hitler Youth transitioned from preparation to action. Teenagers were serving as air raid messengers, fire watchers, and anti-troops of the revolution. By 1943, as Germany's military losses became catastrophically greater, older boys trained in the specialized unit were fed directly into the SS. Many 17-year-olds saw combat on the Eastern Front and even controlled the flak batteries defending German cities from Allied bombers. Then came 1944, and as Allied armies came close in all directions, Hitler called upon his youngest followers, and thousands were drafted into the Volkssturm, Germany's last-ditch military composed of all men and children. Some units even fought with crazy determination, like the 12th SS Panzer Division, Hitler Jugend, which was formed mostly of volunteers who were born in 1926. Mind you, these were just kids. At Normandy, they even earned medals for their suicidal discipline but suffered crazy casualties. Others defended Berlin itself in 1945 and were armed with panzers and the propaganda-fueled courage against the overwhelming Soviet forces. However, a lot of pressure was coming from outside. By the time Nazi Germany fell, the Hitler Youth had lost both its purpose and any community it could cling to. Millions of members were displaced, orphaned, or even psychologically shattered. Their leaders fled or were captured. Some of the most important leaders were captured in 1945 and later tried at Nuremberg. Arthur Axmann, who succeeded as a leader in 1940, went underground until he was captured without all of his historian's skills. There is still debate on the moral responsibility of these young followers, but some emphasize coercion, and after 1939, membership was eliminated under the threat of punishment for families to be refused. Others point to years of psychological conditioning when they believed in Nazi ideology. What's undeniable is the fact that after the war ended, Germany's so-called future generation was standing amongst the greatest victims. These were children who were turned into soldiers and were forced to abandon a world and then rebuild a world that they hoped to destroy. Disappearance. Finally, Germany surrendered in May 1945, and that's when the demise of the Hitler Youth Party happened. The group instantly vanished. Flags, uniforms, and emblems were quickly buried or burned. It was done in panic. The Allied powers were generally shocked by the depth of indoctrination among the German children and how their pressure quickly erased every trace of the organization. On the 10th of October 1945, the Allied Council outlawed the Hitler Youth, declaring it a fundamental component of their policy, saying all the properties were taken, every activity was banned, and the organization that had commanded it ceased to exist overnight. But the Allies faced a unique problem. What do you do with millions of young Germans who retire? Our worldview was shaped by a different type of schooling and relentless propaganda. So let's talk about the Western Zone. It was controlled by America, Britain, and France. The approach here was primarily educational, rather than community. Allied military government directives shut down all Nazi-affiliated youth groups and encouraged the creation of new ones under church or civilian control. The goal here was to re-educate through democracy and civil responsibility, not by revenge or punishment. Like Nazi teachers, pastors, and American British youth officers organized summer camps and discussion groups that were designed to replace marching songs with open debates. They even attempted to teach critical thinking to teenagers who had been trained since childhood to never question authority. Moreover, the Soviet zone took a completely different approach. Re-education was intensely ideological. The FDJ was founded in 1947. It became the only state-approved youth organization that was rapidly absorbing thousands of former Hitler Youth members. Communist doctrine also replaced Nazi beliefs, but the destructive here was quite familiar: uniforms, discipline, and unquestioning devotion to the state. That was all here. The East German leader portrayed fascism as a Western disease, while the FDJ offered its own unique socialist loyalty. For some, it provided belonging and redemption. However, for adult leaders, reckoning came in courtrooms. At the Nuremberg trial, Baldur von Schirach faced charges of crimes against humanity for spreading his Nazi ideology and deporting Jews from Vienna. In October 1946, 20-year prison sentence. His successor, Arthur Axmann, was captured in December 1945 and was tried by a German denazification court. In May 1949, he was sentenced to 3 years and 3 months for membership in a criminal organization, but was released shortly after, claiming that he had broken up with the Nazis.
Well, it's time now for our last extract in this program on religion and morality, and it goes to the heart of what is surely one of the most important moral issues.
For regular members, who were around 8 million at the war's end, the process was far less clear. Denazification questionnaires about Hitler Youth activities were done, and most were classified as followers rather than active offenders. Many were still teenagers or war orphans with no way to go. Western authorities quickly realized that punishing an entire generation was not only impossible, but it would only create more and more anger between everyone. So they focused on schooling, psychological counseling, and removing the Nazi symbol from public spaces. When the Federal Republic of Germany was founded in 1949, the question of guilt amongst former Hitler Youth largely ended from the official debate. However, beneath the surface, trauma still remained because many of the former members spoke of profound confusion. They were raised to worship a leader who was gone and had killed himself. The Hitler Youth was dissolved, but the influence lingered in millions of minds that were slowly learning what freedom and responsibility were, because they were all born in war. Living in the past. Then came the early 1950s, when Germany was rebuilding itself, and so were millions of young men and women who once hailed Hitler in the purest form. On both the eastern and western sides, former members faced the same impossible question: how do you live with the past that you were taught to worship? It was almost like following a religion and then being asked to leave that religion in West Germany. Allied occupation gave away Reconstruction and the rise of the Federal Republic in 1949. There was an economic revival, or economic miracle, as they would like to say it, which created new jobs, homes, and families. Former Hitler Youth members, who were mostly in their 20s and 30s, blended easily into this recovery since membership became mandatory in 1939. Only a few carried social stigma. Teachers, civil servants, and even lawmakers of the new republic often shared identical youth training. Historians also noted that the Hitler Youth's generation was born roughly between 1922 and 1930, which became the backbone of the post-war society. They were disciplined, pragmatic, but often emotionally scarred. Public discussion was also non-existent. The 1950s and 60s became decades of deliberate collection and collective forgetting, when many Germans saw themselves as victims of war and displacements rather than the participants in Nazism. In schools, the topic was avoided or treated abstractly, and former members also rarely spoke about their experiences. Some from shame, while others had a genuine belief that what they had done as children was beyond their control. Only in real autobiographies did voices from the Hitler Youth generation begin emerging. We had the journalist Elfone Heck and historian Melita Mashman, who wrote crazy accounts of their experiences, describing both the intoxication of their own self and the horror of realizing what they were doing. During the 1960s and 70s, as the new generation came of age, the silence began cracking. Students questioned their parents' wartime goals, demanding answers about what they had done. The former Hitler Youth members, who were now in their 40s, found themselves being confronted by their own children, living in classrooms and living rooms. Then came the memoirs, documentaries, and early historical studies that taught how deeply Nazi indoctrination had shaped worldviews. Psychologists observed shared emotional patterns. There was denial mixed with guilt and nostalgia that was shadowed by unage. Some former members admitted to 2 moments of pride and camaraderie along with the adventure of their youth, which was immediately followed by lifelong guilt for what they had served in the past. The warning. By the late 20th century, the Hitler Youth had already evolved from just a simple fact into a symbol, not just of Nazism, but of how entire generations can be captured by a simple ideology. In post-war Germany, official memory evolved slowly. First, West German studies appeared in the 1960s, but it wasn't until the 1980s and 1990s that schools began teaching the subject comprehensively. Children of former members pushed for transparency, demanding to know what their parents had actually done. Universities even hosted Hitler Youth Generation conferences, exploring how early indoctrination affected democratic values in adulthood. Many of the former members also participated in interviews, describing how guilt, silence, and discipline carried into post-war lives. Their testimonies revealed that the human cost of collective psychological manipulation existed. After German reunification in 1990, historians began comparing both systems, the Nazi and the communist youth organizations. They found striking similarities in the uniform, slogan, and state loyalty package, but for different ideologies. Internationally, educators also started using the Hitler Youth as a case study. For most visitors, the most unsettling question is, why did the Hitler Youth exist, and how easily could it exist? The former members themselves are nearly gone now. The youngest would be in their 90s. But their story isn't about the one organization's collapse. It's about an entire generation's transformation and what they could have been if they weren't changed by Hitler's ideology. This is the legacy of the Hitler Youth and what happened to him. Subscribe to the channel now because the next few videos are going to blow your mind.